The air in the conditioning chamber was cold, sterile, and smelled of nothing. That was the point. It was a blank slate upon which Unit 734 was to be calibrated, his own scent scoured from his skin, his hair, his very lungs, replaced by the odorless chill of compliance. He stood motionless on the polished chrome disc, arms at his sides, gaze fixed on the faint reflection of his own silhouette in the obsidian glass of the observation window. The reflection was a stranger, a construct of pale skin and dark hair, its posture a study in rigid submission. It was not him. He was not a person. He was an asset. The soft hiss of a pneumatic needle sliding from a hidden recess in the wall beside him was a familiar sound, a prelude to the daily litany of chemical reinforcement. He did not flinch as the auto-injector pressed against the nape of his neck, just below the hairline. The sharp sting was a confirmation of his purpose. First, the scent suppressant, a viscous gel that felt like ice flooding his veins, silencing the faint, traitorous whisper of winter frost and ozone that marked him as Omega. Then came the hormonal regulators, flattening his emotional responses to a placid, manageable baseline. Finally, the nutrient solution, because sustenance was a matter of operational efficiency, not pleasure. Emotion is a liability. Scent is a vulnerability. Identity is a weakness. The words, the foundational tenets of the agency's Omega reclamation program, cycled through his mind, not as thought, but as code. He had been reclaimed from the chaos of his own biology, refined into a tool of surgical precision. His handler, Director Thorne, appeared as a disembodied voice from a speaker grid in the ceiling. The voice was as sterile as the room, devoid of inflection. Unit 734 approached the console. He moved, his bare feet silent on the cold floor. A panel slid open, revealing a datapad glowing with soft cyan light. His mission parameters. He absorbed the data with practiced efficiency. Target: Kalen Varys, Alpha, leader of the Meridian Concord. Objective: infiltrate his inner circle, identify systemic vulnerabilities, and transmit actionable intelligence. Kalen Varys. The name was a specter in the agency's threat assessments. A charismatic, enigmatic leader who had carved out a formidable independent state from the crumbling fringes of the coalition's authority. The files depicted him as a ruthless ideologue, but the intelligence was contradictory, filled with gaps. He was a ghost, his motivations and weaknesses shrouded in rumor. Your cover will be that of a displaced Omega seeking sanctuary, Thorne's voice continued, the irony a razor blade beneath the flat tone. You will be designated alien. You will perform vulnerability. You will perform need. The Concord's intake protocols are known to be lenient. They pride themselves on it. Exploit this. Perform vulnerability. He, who had been systematically stripped of it. He was to wear the skin he had been taught to despise, to weaponize the very nature the agency had sought to erase. The datapad displayed a holographic image of Kalen Varys. The man was taller than the official records suggested, with dark hair and eyes that seemed to absorb the light. His expression in the still image was neutral, yet it conveyed a sense of immense, coiled stillness. A predator at rest. He was not the kind of brutish alpha the agency used for wet work. He was something else, something more dangerous. A strategist, an architect of systems. His scent profile was listed as unconfirmed, but anecdotal reports described it as cedar and cold stone, an unpoetic, almost geological description that somehow seemed fitting. You will be provided with a modified suppressant regimen, Thorne stated. It will allow for a controlled, minimal scent release, enough to register as a distressed, unbonded omega. Your biological markers will be flagged as unstable due to trauma. The legend is comprehensive. A lie wrapped in a lie. He was a hollow man, being sent to sell his own ghost story. He committed the details to memory, the fabricated history of a small settlement raided by scavengers, the loss of a fabricated family, the desperate flight to Meridian, the last bastion of hope. Every detail was designed to be a hook, a point of leverage for pity and protection. His own history, the real one, was a black box, a redacted file even in his own mind. There was only the agency. There was only the mission. A final injection hissed into his arm. A neuro-dampener. It would keep his instincts suppressed, prevent an autonomic reaction to the target alpha's presence. The agency left nothing to chance. Remember your conditioning, 734? Thorne's voice was a final, cold commandment. You are a weapon. You have no needs beyond the objective. You have no self. Failure will result in decommissioning. Decommissioning, a clean, clinical word for erasure. He had seen it happen. He remembered Unit 612, who had shown a flicker of genuine emotional attachment to a target. They had simply wiped him. A clean slate returned to the conditioning chamber, his eyes vacant, his scent gone forever. The chrome disc hummed, lowering him into the transit tube. Darkness enveloped him, the sterile air replaced by the recycled metallic tang of the transport system. In the dark, for a moment, he was just a body in a box, hurtling toward an unknown fate. He pressed his palm against his sternum, feeling the steady, regulated beat of his heart. It was not his heart. It was a component, functioning within acceptable parameters. He was not alien. He was not an omega. He was Unit 734, and he would not fail. The thought was not a comfort. It was a fact, a line of code that defined his existence. But as the transport accelerated, a ghost of a sensation surfaced from the deep, frozen parts of his mind, a phantom scent of frost, a memory of a sky vast and cold. It was a fragment of a self. He was not supposed to have a glitch in the system. He crushed it, pushed it down into the abyss where all such liabilities were kept. The mission was everything. The transition from the sterile, pressurized environment of the transport to the open air of Meridian was a physical assault. The air was thick, heavy with 1,000 scents he had been conditioned to ignore, to filter out as meaningless data. Here they were, a symphony of overwhelming complexity. The smell of soil after rain, of hot metal and ozone from the orbital transports, of cooked food and unsuppressed life. It was chaotic, organic, and nauseating. He stumbled as he exited the public transit station, his carefully constructed facade of a frightened refugee momentarily forgotten in the sensory onslaught. His neurodampeners were working overtime, but they could not erase the sheer volume of information flooding his senses. He was in the lower sector, a sprawling, vibrant district teeming with people. Alphas, betas, omegas, all moving freely, their scents mingling in the humid air. It was a violation of every protocol he had ever known. The agency segregated designations, controlled interactions, curated every scent to maintain order. This was anarchy. He forced himself to move, to blend into the river of bodies. He kept his head down, his shoulders hunched, mimicking the posture of the other displaced individuals in the queue for the sanctuary intake center. He was alien now, scared, alone, broken. He repeated the legend in his mind, letting the fabricated trauma settle over him like a shroud. The building was not the gleaming, sterile facility he had expected. It was old, built from dark, weathered stone and reinforced steel, but vines with small white flowers climbed its walls, softening its brutalist edges. It felt less like a government building and more like a fortress that had reluctantly made peace with the world. Inside, the chaos of the street was replaced by a quiet, orderly hum. The air was cleaner, filtered, but still carried the scent of life. Antiseptic, yes, but also warm bread and something floral. A beta with kind eyes and a weary smile processed his initial application on a datapad. He answered her questions in a soft, trembling voice, the words of his legend catching in his throat as if too painful to speak. He let a carefully measured sliver of his scent leak past the suppressants, the scent of fear, of an omega on the edge of distress. The beta's expression softened with sympathy. "It's all right," she murmured, her own scent a calming wave of chamomile and warm paper. "You're safe here." Safe. The word was alien. He had never been safe. He had been secure, contained, controlled. Safety was a variable the agency did not compute. He was guided through a series of medical and psychological evaluations. The doctors were thorough but gentle. They noted the chemical residue of his suppressants, the faint scarring at the base of his neck. They attributed it to black market tech, a desperate attempt to survive in the lawless outer territories. Their pity was a lubricant, easing his passage deeper into the system. He spent the first night in a communal dormitory, a large, quiet room filled with the soft sounds of sleeping bodies. It was the first time in his memory he had slept in a room with others who were not also units in a barracks. The proximity was unnerving. He lay on the thin mattress, feigning sleep, and listened. He catalogued the scents, the breathing patterns, the quiet sobs of a newly arrived Omega across the room. He was an observer, a ghost in a room full of ghosts. The next day, he was given a work assignment, archival assistance in the central command tower. It was a low-level, tedious job, exactly the kind of position that would allow him to be overlooked, to become part of the scenery. It was a perfect infiltration vector. The command tower was the heart of Meridian, a stark pillar of black steel and glass that rose from the center of the city, and it was the domain of Kalen Varys. He saw him for the first time on his third day, not in a meeting, not in a formal introduction, but as a passing figure in a glass-walled corridor high above the archives. Kalian was walking with two of his senior officers, his stride long and unhurried. He was dressed in the simple, dark uniform of the Concord, devoid of any rank insignia, yet his authority was an aura, a palpable pressure that seemed to bend the space around him. He wasn't speaking. He was listening, his head inclined slightly as one of his officers spoke. The files had not done him justice. They had captured his image, but not his presence. There was a profound stillness about him, a weight. Even from a distance, separated by 2 layers of reinforced glass and 50 meters of open atrium, Elian felt a strange pull, a primal recognition that his body, despite the dampeners, registered on a cellular level. Alpha. The word was not a thought. It was a thrum beneath his skin. He quickly looked down at the datapad in his hands, feigning absorption in his work, his heart rate ticking up by a single, controlled beat. That was all he allowed. 1 beat. But he felt the weight of a gaze, a brief, passing flicker of attention. He did not look up. He could not. To meet the target's eyes before the designated time was a tactical error. He continued his work, sorting and cataloging historical data files, his movements precise and efficient. But the image of the Alpha in the corridor was seared into his mind. The agency had prepared him for a monster, a tyrant. They had not prepared him for the quiet, focused intensity he had just witnessed. They had not prepared him for the cold, logical part of his brain to tag Kalen Varys, not as a target, but as a commander, a leader you would follow into the fire. He purged the thought. It was a product of his Omega biology, a flaw in his design that the dampeners were failing to contain. He was a tool. Kalen Varys was an objective. Nothing more. Yet as he worked late into the night, the vast, silent archives his only companion, he felt a strange sense of being watched. Not by cameras, he had already mapped their locations and blind spots, but by something else, a human intelligence. He dismissed it as paranoia, a side effect of the mission's stress. The agency did not train its assets to be paranoid. It trained them to be aware, and his awareness was telling him that something in this quiet, orderly fortress was looking for him. Kalen Varys watched the security feed on the secondary monitor of his desk. The main screen displayed troop deployment logistics for the Outer Rim, a complex and demanding problem. But his attention was fixed on the small, silent figure moving through the deep archives. Elian. The name was soft, unassuming. The Omega himself was anything but. From the moment the intake file had crossed his desk, Kalen had felt a dissonant note. The story was perfect. Too perfect. A textbook tragedy designed to elicit a specific emotional response. The biometrics were clean, but the medical report noted the chemical signature of military-grade suppressants, far more advanced than anything a backwater refugee could acquire. The psychological evaluation described a subject exhibiting classic signs of acute trauma, yet his physical movements, observed through the ever-present eyes of the tower's security, were a study in economy and control. He moved like a soldier. He scanned rooms like an intelligence operative. He existed in a state of hypervigilance that he masked with a veneer of broken fragility. Kalen had seen that kind of conditioning before. He'd seen it in the hollowed-out eyes of coalition child soldiers, in the rigid postures of their special forces units. The coalition took people, alphas, betas, omegas, and sanded them down until all that remained was their function. They created perfect tools, and they had sent one of their tools to his city. He zoomed in on the feed, watching the Omega, Elian, at work. The boy was meticulous, his hands moving with a fluid precision that was mesmerizing. He was supposed to be sorting decommissioned agricultural reports from the last century. It was make work, a task assigned to keep new arrivals occupied. Yet he approached it with the focus of a cryptographer breaking an enemy cipher. His cover was flawless, but the training was a ghost, visible in every controlled gesture, every disciplined breath. The most interesting part, however, was the scent. His chief medical officer, a pragmatic beta named Lena, had reported that the Omega's scent was almost completely masked. What little bled through was faint, distorted by the suppressants, but she had managed to isolate a primary note in the sample. Winter frost, a scent of cold, clean stillness. But Kalen, whose own senses were preternaturally sharp, could detect something more. From the air vents that cycled the atmosphere, from the archives to his command center, he could taste a trace of it. Underneath the frost was something sharp and electric. Ozone after a lightning strike. It was a scent of beautiful, dangerous potential. A storm locked in ice. He had not alerted his security chief. He had not confined the spy. To do so would be to play the coalition's game by their rules. It would be a waste. The coalition saw this Omega as an asset, a disposable tool. They had sent him to find a weakness in Meridian's walls. Kalen saw something else. He saw a key. He saw a mirror. He knew what it was to be forged into a weapon, to have your own nature turned against you. The coalition had risen from the ashes of the old world by promising order, but their order was a sterile prison. They believed control was achieved by excision, of emotion, of identity, of freedom. Kalen believed true strength came from integration. He had built Meridian on that principle. A place where alphas were not just conquerors, where omegas were not just prizes, where betas were not just functionaries, a place where people could be whole. And here was a living embodiment of the coalition's sickness, delivered to his doorstep, a person so thoroughly fractured that he believed he was no longer a person at all. Kalen leaned back in his chair, tapping a command into his console. He pulled up Elian's work roster and his assigned quarters. He cross-referenced them with his own schedule. An idea was forming, a strategy that was both reckless and perfectly logical. The coalition wanted him to find a vulnerability in Meridian. He would give him one. He would give him himself. Exposing the spy would be easy. It would also be short-sighted. It would simply confirm the coalition's belief that he was a predictable, brutish alpha. They would send another spy and another. But if he could turn their own weapon against them, if he could show this broken tool what it meant to be a person again, that would be a blow struck not against their border, but against their very ideology. It was a dangerous game. The Omega was highly trained. He could be a threat. There was a non-zero chance this could end with a blade in his own back. He accepted the risk. He had built his city on calculated risks. He typed a new directive and sent it to the archival manager. A simple request. Send the new assistant, Elian, to my office tomorrow at 0800. He is to be assigned to a special data collation project under my direct supervision. He shut down the security feed. He did not need to watch the spy anymore. Tomorrow, he would meet the man. The game was set. The pieces were in motion, and Kalen Varys intended to win. He rose and walked to the large window that comprised one entire wall of his office. Below, the lights of Meridian spread out like a field of fallen stars, a city of refugees, of runaways, of people who had chosen the uncertainty of freedom over the cold certainty of the coalition's control. He had a responsibility to them, to protect them, and sometimes the best way to protect your home was to invite the enemy inside and offer him a seat at your table. The air in his office cycled, and for a moment he caught that phantom scent again. Frost and ozone. A coming storm. He was looking forward to the rain. The summons arrived as a simple text-only message on his datapad at 500. Elian, report to the Alpha's office. Command level 0800. No explanation. No pleasantries. Just a command. Elian stared at the stark, glowing words, and for the first time since arriving in Meridian, the placid, regulated rhythm of his heart faltered. A flutter of something cold and sharp. The agency had a protocol for this accelerated integration. It was also a protocol for exposure and elimination. This was not part of the mission plan. He was supposed to remain a ghost, a low-level functionary gathering passive intelligence for months before attempting any proximity to the target. To be summoned directly so soon meant one of two things. He had been exceptionally successful in his role as a pitiable refugee, earning the Alpha's notice through some misplaced sense of charity, or he had been made. His conditioning screamed the latter. He spent the next 3 hours in a state of heightened, cold focus. He reviewed every moment since his arrival, every interaction, every word spoken. He searched for his mistake, the crack in his performance. He found none. His cover was perfect, which meant the error was not in his performance, but in the Alpha's perception. Kalen Varys was more observant than the agency's profile had predicted. This was a new variable, a dangerous one. At 0755, he stood before the heavy, unmarked door to the Alpha's office. The corridor was silent, the air still and cool. He could feel the faint hum of the tower's systems through the soles of his boots. He smoothed down his simple grey tunic, a garment designed to be forgettable, and regulated his breathing. Inhale for 4 counts, hold for 7, exhale for 8. The agency's first lesson in emotional control. He was calm. He was prepared. He was a lie. The door slid open at precisely 0800 without him touching it. The office beyond was vast and minimalist, a space of dark metal, polished concrete, and glass. One entire wall was a window looking down upon the sprawling city. The only furniture was a large black desk that seemed carved from a single block of obsidian, 2 simple chairs, and shelves filled not with datapads or weapons, but with books, real books, bound in leather and paper. Kalen Varys was standing by the window, his back to the door. He did not turn. "Elian," he said. His voice was deeper than Elian had expected, a low baritone that resonated in the cavernous room. It was not a question. It was a statement of fact. "You came. You summoned me, Alpha," Elian replied, his voice soft, pitched to convey subservience. He kept his gaze lowered, fixed on a point on the floor 3 feet in front of him, a posture of Omega deference, a calculated display of weakness. "I did." A long silence stretched, thick with unspoken tension. Elian remained perfectly still, a statue of humility. He could feel the Alpha's presence as a physical weight, a gravitational pull that his instincts, muted as they were, screamed at him to acknowledge. The scent in the room was subtle but pervasive, cedarwood and cold stone. It smelled of permanence, of unyielding strength. It was a scent that promised stability and demanded submission. Finally, Varys turned. He moved with a slow, deliberate grace that was at odds with his powerful frame. He walked not to his desk, the seat of power, but to a small counter where a pot of tea was brewing, steam rising in a fragrant cloud. "Are you afraid of me, Elian?" he asked, his back to him once more. The question was a test, a trap. Fear was the expected answer. "Yes, Alpha," he whispered. "Good," Varys said, without a hint of triumph. "Fear is a rational response to a power imbalance. It keeps you alive." He turned, holding 2 simple ceramic cups. He extended one to Elian. "But it should not prevent you from accepting a cup of tea." Elian hesitated for a fraction of a second. A tactical assessment. Was it poisoned? Unlikely. Too crude for a man like this. Was it a test of trust? Almost certainly. He took the cup, his fingers brushing against the Alpha's. The contact was brief, impersonal, but a jolt, like static electricity, shot up his arm. Kalen's eyes met his, and the world seemed to tilt. The Alpha's eyes were not black, as the files had suggested, but a deep slate grey, like a storm-tossed sea. And in their depths, Elian saw not malice, not suspicion, but a calm, unnerving certainty. It was the look of a man who had already read the last page of the book. "I have a project for you," Kalen said, moving to his desk. He gestured for Elian to take the other chair. It was an invitation, not a command, which was somehow more commanding. The Coalition's public broadcasts, decades of them, they are filled with propaganda, subliminal messaging, historical revisionism. I want you to analyze them. I want you to find the patterns, the lies, the subtle shifts in their doctrine over time. I want you to build me a library of their deceit. Elian's mind raced. This was a gift, unrestricted access to the enemy's unencrypted data streams, a direct line into their public psyche. It was a treasure trove of intelligence. It was also a test, a leash, a way to keep him close, to monitor his work, his thoughts. I don't know if I'm qualified, Alpha," he stammered, playing his part. "You are more qualified than you think," Kalen said, and the words were laced with a meaning that went far beyond the task at hand. He leaned forward, his forearms resting on the polished black desk. The space between them shrank. "I've read your file, Elian. All of it. The official one, at least. The story of a boy from a raided settlement. It's very moving." He paused, his grey eyes pinning Elian in place. "Tell me, in your settlement, did they teach you to read thermal imaging overlays and spot security camera blind spots?" The air left Elian's lungs. It was not an accusation. It was a statement of fact, delivered in a calm, conversational tone. The game was over. He was exposed. Every protocol screamed at him. Deny, deflect, terminate the mission, terminate the target, if possible. But his body would not move. He was frozen, not by fear, but by the sheer, absolute calm of the man across from him. Kalen Varys knew. He knew. And he was offering him tea. "They also taught you to control your heart rate," Kalen continued, his gaze unwavering. "Even now it's barely elevated. Impressive. The agency trains its assets well." He leaned back in his chair, the picture of relaxation. "So, here is the situation. You are a spy. I am your target. Your mission is to find a vulnerability in my organization. My mission, as I see it, is to protect my city. It seems we are at an impasse." He steepled his fingers, looking at Elian over them. "Or, perhaps, we have a unique opportunity. You can continue to play your game, and I will continue to watch you. You can send your reports, and I will allow you to do so. Or you can do the job I just offered you. A real job. And we can see what happens." He was not being offered a choice between life and death. He was being offered a choice between two missions. One from a handler who saw him as a number, and one from a target who saw him, terrifyingly, as a person. "Why?" Elian finally managed to whisper, the single word a betrayal of his training. "Emotion is a liability." "Because I am curious," Kalen said simply. "I want to see what a person who has been told they are a weapon does when they are finally offered a choice. Now drink your tea. It's getting cold." Kalen watched the play of emotions on the Omega's face. It was a subtle performance, a cascade of micro-expressions that a less observant man would have missed. First, the flicker of pure cold shock as the facade was stripped away. Then a wave of disciplined appraisal, the spy assessing the new tactical reality. Finally, a sliver of something he couldn't quite name. Not fear, but a profound, disorienting confusion. It was the look of a man whose entire universe had just been proven false. He had expected denial, perhaps even a desperate, suicidal attack. The agency's conditioning was legendarily brutal. They broke their assets and rebuilt them as extensions of their own will. They were not supposed to be capable of improvisation when their core programming was challenged. But this Unit 734, was different. He did not break. He did not attack. He simply sat there, holding a cup of cooling tea, his mind clearly working at a furious pace. Kalen had taken a significant risk. By revealing his knowledge, he had forfeited the advantage of surprise. He had laid his cards on the table, an act of either supreme confidence or utter foolishness. He believed it was the former. Dealing with the coalition was like playing chess with a machine. It made predictable, logical moves, always sacrificing its pawns to protect its queen. To the coalition, Unit 734 was a pawn, advanced to a critical position on the board. By refusing to simply take the piece, Kalen was changing the nature of the game itself. He was not interested in winning by the coalition's rules. He was interested in proving their rules obsolete. "Your agency," Kalen began, his tone deliberately neutral, analytical, operates on the principle of dehumanization. It believes that by stripping you of your name, your scent, your very identity, it can ensure your loyalty. They believe control is absolute. He picked up his own cup, cradling its warmth in his hands. "I disagree. I believe loyalty that is coerced is merely compliance, and compliance is brittle. It shatters under pressure. True loyalty must be given. It must be earned." He had seen the archives of the Omega reclamation program, fragments of data his own intelligence agents had risked their lives to acquire. He had seen the schematics for the conditioning chambers, the chemical formulas for the suppressants, the psychological profiles that read like engineering specifications. It was a system of breathtaking cruelty, all in the name of order, and the man sitting across from him was its most perfect product, or so the agency believed. "They sent you to find my weakness," Kalen continued, setting his cup down. "They assume it is strategic, logistical, or perhaps personal. A secret vice, a hidden love. They think in terms of leverage points because that is all they understand." He looked directly at Elian, his gaze intense. "My weakness, Unit 734, is that I still believe in the idea of people. I believe that even a tool, if it is sharp enough, can carve its own path. I believe that a weapon can choose not to be fired." This was the heart of his gamble. He was betting that somewhere, buried beneath the layers of conditioning, the chemical suppressants, and the psychological scarring, there was still a person who could be reached, not through coercion or threat, but through an appeal to the one thing the agency had tried to extinguish, his will. He was offering the Omega a new paradigm, not as a prisoner, not as a convert, but as a contractor. He was giving him a new mission, one that ran parallel to his old one. Analyze the coalition. The irony was exquisite. He would use the agency's own weapon to dissect them, to expose their lies not for a faceless handler, but for himself. And in doing so, perhaps the Omega would begin to see the true nature of the system he served. "Your handlers will expect reports," Kalen stated calmly. "I will provide you with a secure workspace. You will have access to the data I mentioned. You will also have access to our network. You can send them whatever you deem appropriate. You can tell them I know. You can feed them disinformation I provide. Or you can tell them the truth of your work here. The choice is yours. I will not monitor your outbound communications." This was the final, most crucial part of the offer, the illusion of freedom backed by a very real trust. It was a test of character, not of skill, Would the spy remain a spy, or would he become something more? The Omega alien finally moved. He raised the cup to his lips and took a slow, deliberate sip. His eyes, the color of a winter sky, were unreadable. When he spoke, his voice was no longer the soft, trembling whisper of the refugee. It was flat, devoid of emotion, the voice of Unit 734. The mission parameters have changed. I require time to process the new intelligence. It was not an acceptance. It was not a refusal. It was the response of a trained operative acknowledging a new reality. It was more than Kalen could have hoped for. "You have it," Kalen said, a thin smile touching his lips for the first time. "Your new workspace is prepared. It's adjacent to my own." For efficiency, he stood. The meeting concluded. "Welcome to the project, alien." The Omega stood as well, his movements economical. He placed the empty cup on the desk. For a moment, Kalen caught his scent, clearer now, as if the shock had momentarily disrupted the suppressants, frost and ozone, and underneath it, a trace of something else, something he hadn't noticed before, the faint, metallic tang of unshed tears. The game was afoot, and it was already more interesting than he could have imagined. The days that followed were a disorienting blend of cold routine and simmering tension. Elian was given a small, windowless office adjacent to Kalen's. The two rooms were separated by a wall of smart glass that could be rendered opaque or transparent with a touch. Kalen, for the most part, left it transparent. The feeling of being perpetually observed was a constant, low-level hum beneath Elian's skin. It was a cage with invisible bars, a test of his composure. He threw himself into the work Kalen had assigned. The Coalition archives were a cesspool of calculated lies. He spent hours watching the broadcasts, his face a neutral mask, as he tagged subliminal cues, tracked the evolution of propaganda narratives, and cross-referenced public declarations with known covert operations. He worked with a chilling efficiency, his mind a perfect instrument for this kind of analytical dissection. He was, after all, a product of the very system he was now cataloguing. He understood its language, its silent grammar of control. He filed his reports to Kalen twice a day. They were concise, clinical, and brilliant. He filed his reports to the agency once a week. They were masterpieces of misdirection. He took the useless data Kalen had given him, outdated shipping manifests, flawed troop readiness assessments, and wove them into a compelling narrative of a system on the brink of logistical collapse. He reported that the Alpha, Kalen Varys, was a charismatic but disorganized leader, surrounded by incompetent sycophants. He painted a picture of a ripe fruit, ready to fall. It was exactly what the agency wanted to hear. It was a lie that would keep him alive. The most difficult part of his new reality was Kalen himself. The Alpha was a constant, unsettling presence. He rarely spoke to Elian directly about the work, trusting him to complete it. Instead, their interactions were small, mundane, and utterly confounding. Kalen would leave a cup of tea on his desk in the morning, the same blend they had shared on the first day. He would ask Elian if he had eaten, his tone casual, as if asking a colleague, not a captive spy. One evening, as Elian worked late, hunched over a flickering screen, Kalen had entered his office and simply placed a weighted blanket over his shoulders. "Your core temperature is dropping," the Alpha had said, his voice a low rumble. "It's a common side effect of prolonged stimulant use without proper nutrition. The agency's standard field package, I presume?" He had left without waiting for an answer. The blanket was warm, heavy, and smelled faintly of cedar. Elian had sat there for an hour, unable to move, the simple, non-tactical weight on his shoulders a more profound shock to his system than any threat. These small acts of consideration were a form of psychological warfare he had not been trained for. The agency's methods were pain, deprivation, and fear. They were easy to understand, easy to resist. How was he to resist a cup of tea? How was he to classify a warm blanket in a threat assessment report? He was a tool, but Kalen Varys was not using him like one. He was maintaining him, caring for him, like something valuable, something worth preserving. This cognitive dissonance began to manifest physically. The suppressants, designed to function in a system under extreme but predictable stress, were beginning to falter. He would be deep in his work, and a wave of heat would wash over him, his skin tingling. The faint scent of ozone would rise from his skin, sharp and telling. He would catch his own reflection in the darkened smart glass and see a flush on his cheeks, a wildness in his eyes that did not belong to Unit 734. His body was betraying him. It was remembering that it was a body, that it had needs and desires that could not be indefinitely postponed by chemical fiat. He was an Omega. The thought was a spike of panic. He increased his own dosage, overriding the timed release of his injectors, but it was like trying to patch a crumbling dam. The pressure of his own biology, combined with the constant, low-grade pheromonal output of the powerful alpha just a few feet away, was creating a feedback loop. He started to see his past handler, Director Thorne, in his dreams, not as a figure of authority, but as a distant, cold star in a black sky, whispering the old mantras. Emotion is a liability. You are a weapon. You have no self. But the voice was growing fainter, and the dreams were now tinged with the scent of cedar and the feeling of a heavy blanket. One afternoon, he felt the first real cramp, a low, ominous ache in his abdomen. It was not a side effect of the drugs. It was a harbinger, preheat, a catastrophic, mission-ending failure. He gripped the edge of his desk, his knuckles white, and forced himself to breathe through it. He had to get out. He had to get to a medical unit, demand stronger suppressants, blame it on a faulty batch. He stood up, his legs unsteady. The room tilted slightly. Through the glass, he saw Kalen at his desk, speaking quietly into a comms unit. Kalen looked up, his grey eyes meeting Elian's. His expression changed instantly. The calm commander was gone, replaced by something sharper, more focused. He ended the call without a word of farewell. He stood up and moved towards the glass, his eyes scanning Elian from head to toe in a way that felt more like a medical diagnostic than a gaze. Elian backed away from the glass, a cornered animal. This was it. The end. His weakness, his flawed Omega biology, exposed for the Alpha to see. He was a broken tool, ready for the scrap heap. Kalen didn't enter Elian's office. He simply touched a control on his side of the wall. Lockdown protocol, a calm, computerized voice announced. Heavy steel shutters descended over the great window in Kalen's office, plunging both rooms into a dim, artificial twilight. The door to the corridor sealed with a heavy thud. They were locked in, together. Elian's carefully controlled world, the one he had so painstakingly maintained for weeks, shattered into a million pieces. The scent of his own distress, ozone, and burnt sugar flooded the small office. He had failed. He was compromised. And he was trapped with the one person his body was beginning to scream for. The scent hit Kalen like a physical blow. One moment, he was discussing supply chain logistics with his quartermaster. The next, the air was saturated with the smell of ozone, sharp and frantic, laced with a sweet, feverish note of distress. It was Elian's scent, raw and unfiltered, a silent scream that cut through the sterile air of the command suite. He ended the call and was on his feet before he had consciously made the decision. Through the glass, he saw the Omega, pale and trembling, his disciplined posture shattered. The boy was leaning against his desk for support, a fine sheen of sweat on his brow. His eyes were wide with a terror that was no longer performative. This was real. This was a biological crisis. Kalen's first instinct was primal. Alpha, protect, claim. It was a base, ugly impulse, the part of his biology he had spent his life mastering. He crushed it with brutal efficiency. Elian was not a prize to be claimed. He was a man in distress, and he was Kalen's responsibility. He initiated the lockdown. It was a security measure designed for assassination attempts or direct assaults on the command level, sealing the suite in a cocoon of reinforced steel. To an outside observer, it would look like a security drill, but its true purpose was to create a sanctuary, to isolate them from the rest of the tower, to keep prying eyes and concerned subordinates away, to give Elian privacy and safety in his moment of absolute vulnerability. He did not cross the threshold into Elian's office. To do so now would be an act of aggression, an invasion. He was the alpha, the source of the pheromonal pressure that had likely contributed to this collapse. He was both the potential solution and the cause of the problem. He had to manage this with surgical precision. "Elian," he said, his voice low and steady, projecting it through the office's internal comm system to avoid shouting through the glass. "Listen to me. You are not in danger. This is a physiological event. Your suppressant regimen has failed." He watched as Elian flinched at the clinical words, a fresh wave of shame washing over his face. The Omega slid down to the floor, wrapping his arms around his knees, making himself small. A textbook, defensive posture. "I know what the agency told you this is," Kalen continued, his voice softening slightly. "A weakness, a failure, a flaw to be purged. They are wrong." He moved to his own side of the glass wall and sank to the floor, mirroring Elian's position. He was no longer the towering alpha looking down, but a man sitting on the floor, meeting him at his level. It was a deliberate act of submission, a gesture he knew Elian's training would force him to analyze and, hopefully, understand. This is not a failure of your discipline. It is a failure of their chemistry. Your body is fighting to survive, to be what it is. It is a sign of strength, not weakness. Another wave of heat radiated from the Omega, and the scent of ozone was joined by the clean, sharp smell of frost. His true scent, the one Kalen had only caught glimpses of, was breaking through. It was exquisite, and it was agonizing, for both of them. Elian looked up, his eyes glassy with fever. "Protocol," he rasped, the word torn from his throat. "In case of biological compromise, self-termination is authorized." Kalen felt a surge of cold fury directed at the faceless architects of the agency. They had programmed this brilliant, beautiful man to kill himself rather than experience a natural biological function. "That is an order from a power that no longer has authority over you," Kalen said, his voice a low growl of protective rage. "I am the alpha of this territory, and my order is that you will live." He saw a flicker of defiance in Elian's eyes, the last vestiges of a lifetime of conditioning. The boy was at war with himself, his training battling his instincts, his body a battlefield. He was losing. "I can help you," Kalen said, the words costing him more than Elian would ever know. "Or I can have a medical team come. They will sedate you. You will wake up in a few days when it is over. The choice is yours. But self-termination is not one of the options." He was offering control in a situation where Elian had none. It was the only currency that mattered to him. For a long minute, the only sound was Elian's ragged breathing. The air grew thicker, hotter. Kalen's own body was reacting, his senses sharpening, a low growl building in his chest. He focused on the intricate patterns of the city lights visible on a small monitor, a reminder of the world he had built, the principles he stood for. He was not a brute. He was a leader. He controlled his instincts. They did not control him. "No medics," Elian finally whispered, his voice barely audible. "No. Witnesses." The shame in that statement was a physical wound. He would rather suffer through this with his sworn enemy than allow others to see him in this state. "All right," Kalen said, his voice gentle. "No medics." He stood up slowly. "I am going to enter your office now. I am not going to touch you. I'm going to bring you water and blankets. Do you understand?" Elian gave a jerky nod, his head bowed. Kalen overrode the lock on the connecting door. It slid open with a soft hiss, the full force of the Omega's scent. A blizzard of frost and lightning washed over him. It was intoxicating and painful, a symphony of need and fear. He gritted his teeth and focused on his task. Water, blankets. He retrieved them from a small emergency supply closet in his office. When he returned, Elian hadn't moved. He was still curled in a tight ball, shivering despite the heat radiating from his body. Kalen placed the water bottle and a folded blanket on the floor, a safe distance away. "Your training," Kalen said, his voice calm and measured, "is the asset now. Use it. Focus on my voice. Catalog the environmental details. The temperature is 28 degrees Celsius. The ambient light is 300 lux. My heart rate is 80 beats per minute. Steady." He was giving the spy a new mission. Survive this. He was giving him data points, something for his analytical mind to cling to in the storm of biology. He backed away and sat on the floor again, just inside the doorway. A sentinel. He would not get closer unless invited. He would not leave. He would stand watch, and in the dim, quiet intimacy of the sealed-off world, he spoke the words that would change everything. "I know who you are, Unit 734, he said, using the hated designation as a key to unlock the past. "And I know what they did to you, but that is not who you are now. Now you are Elian, and you are safe." The boy flinched, then very slowly uncurled. He reached a trembling hand for the water. It was a start. The world returned in fragments. The first was the scent of cedar, a deep, grounding aroma that felt like solid earth beneath him. The second was the weight of a blanket, heavy and secure, chasing away a chill that seemed to have settled deep in his bones. The third was silence, a profound and peaceful quiet that was utterly alien. He opened his eyes. He was not in his sterile, functional quarters. He was in a large bed with soft linens, in a room he did not recognize. The light was dim, filtered through heavy curtains. He was clean, dressed in a soft, loose-fitting shirt that was not his own. It smelled of Kalen. Panic, cold and sharp, tried to rise in his throat, but it was a distant, feeble thing. He was too weak, too utterly spent. He felt scoured, hollowed out, but whole. The memories of the past few days were a blur of feverish heat and sharp, aching need, a sensory storm that had threatened to tear him apart. But through it all, there was a constant, steady presence, a low voice cutting through the fog, offering not commands, but data, the temperature of the room, the time, the steady beat of a heart that was not his own, a hand, never touching him, but always there, pushing a glass of water toward him, the scent of cedar, a bulwark against the chaos. Kalen had not claimed him, he had not used him, he had guarded him. The door opened, and Kalen entered, carrying a tray. The alpha was dressed in simple grey fatigues, his hair damp as if from a shower. He looked tired. There were dark circles under his eyes, but his movements were as deliberate and calm as ever. He saw that Elian was awake and paused in the doorway, his expression unreadable. For a moment, the old dynamic of spy and target, of predator and prey, hung in the air between them. Then Kalen broke it. "You're in my personal quarters," he said, his voice a low rumble. "I thought it would be more secure and more comfortable." He set the tray down on a nearby table. It held a bowl of broth, a glass of water, and a small, white flower in a vase. The gesture was so absurdly, tenderly domestic that Elian didn't know how to process it. "How do you feel?" Kalen asked. Elian considered the question. How did he feel? The suppressants were gone, purged from his system by the fever. For the first time in a decade, his body was his own. He felt a strange lightness, a clarity. He also felt a deep, resonant ache, the echo of the storm that had passed. "Empty," he said, his voice raspy. Kalen nodded, as if this were the expected answer. "Your system has undergone a hard reset. It will take time to recalibrate." He brought the tray to the bed. "You need to eat." Elian didn't have the strength to argue. He slowly sat up, the blanket pooling around his waist. He took the bowl of broth, his hands trembling slightly. The warmth seeped into his fingers. He ate in silence, Kalen watching him not with the intensity of a commander, but with the quiet patience of a physician observing a patient. When he was finished, Kalen took the tray and spoke. "We need to talk about your future, Elian." The name on his lips still felt foreign, a costume Elian was wearing, but it was starting to feel less like a lie. "Your communication device was destroyed during your episode," Kalen stated, a clinical description for the feverish delirium that had seen Elian smash the small implant against the wall in a fit of confused rage. "Your handlers at the agency will have marked your transponder as offline. They will assume you are compromised or dead." He paused, letting the weight of the words sink in. "They will likely activate a contingency. It could be another agent, a cleaner, or it could be something more direct. They cannot afford to have a failed asset with your knowledge of their operations at large." Elian's blood ran cold. Decommissioning. He had not failed his mission. He had been broken by it. To the agency, the distinction was irrelevant. "You have two options," Kalen continued, his voice flat, laying out the tactical reality. "Option 1. I can arrange for your extraction, a new identity, a transport to a neutral system far from the coalition's reach. You would be free. You would also be alone." He let that hang in the air for a moment. Alone. Elian had always been alone. But now, the word had a new, terrifying weight. "Option 2, Kalen said, his grey eyes locking with Elian's. "You stay. Here. In Meridian." "As your prisoner?" Elian asked, the words sharp with the last dregs of his defiance. "No," Kalen replied, his voice softening. "Not as a prisoner. Not as an asset. Not as a spy." He leaned against the wall, crossing his arms over his chest. "When you first arrived, I gave you a job to test you, to see what you would do. Now I'm offering you a position. My intelligence network is good, but it is external. It sees the coalition as an enemy. You see it from the inside. You were born in its shadow, forged in its fire. You understand them in a way my people never could. I want that knowledge. I want that perspective. I want you to help me protect this city from the people who created you. He was not asking for loyalty. He was not demanding submission. He was offering a purpose, a different purpose from the one he had been given, but a purpose nonetheless, to turn the weapon against its maker. And what do I get in return? Elian asked, the question a relic of a lifetime of transactional relationships. Sanctuary, Kalen said simply. A home, a name that is your own. He paused. And a choice, every day. The choice to be here, the choice to do this work, the choice to leave. This was the true crux of it. The agency had never offered a choice. There was only the mission, and the alternative was erasure. Kalen was offering an open door, the ultimate test of trust. Elian looked down at his hands. They were pale, thin, but they were his. He could feel the blood pulsing in his veins, a rhythm no longer dictated by a machine. For years, he had been a ghost, a reflection, a tool in someone else's hand. He had a chance to be solid, to be real. He thought of Director Thorne's cold voice, of the sterile conditioning chamber, of the needle at the base of his neck. He thought of the fear and the loneliness that had been his constant companions. Then he thought of the scent of cedar, of the weight of a blanket, of a low, calm voice guiding him through the fire. He made a decision. It was the first decision he had ever truly made for himself. He reached under his pillow where he had hidden the shards of his communication implant. He held the shattered pieces in his palm and offered them to Kalen. The contingency, he said, his voice clear and steady for the first time. It won't be a cleaner. It will be Protocol Zero. They will try to burn the entire city to the ground to erase one mistake. He looked up at Kalen, and for the first time he did not see a target or an alpha. He saw an ally. I can help you stop them. Kalen looked at the broken pieces in Elian's hand, then at his face. A slow, genuine smile spread across his lips. It transformed his severe features, making him look younger, less burdened. I know you can, he said. Welcome to Meridian, Elian. The coalition's response was faster and more brutal than Kalen had anticipated, a testament to how seriously they viewed the loss of their asset. Protocol Zero was not in any of the intelligence databases. It was a ghost story, a whispered rumor among defectors, a scorched earth policy so extreme it was considered suicidal. But Elian knew it was real. He had been briefed on its theoretical parameters during his final stages of training, a grim footnote on the consequences of catastrophic failure. It was not a conventional military strike. The coalition valued plausible deniability. Protocol Zero was an act of systemic sabotage designed to turn a city against itself. It was a computer virus, a biological agent, and a psychological warfare campaign rolled into one devastating package. While Kalen mobilized Meridian's defense forces, preparing for a physical assault that might never come, Elian was installed in the heart of the command center's network security hub. Surrounded by holographic displays and data streams, he was finally in his element. The work was a strange homecoming. He slipped back into the cold, logical mindset of his training. But now the objective was different. He was not seeking to destroy. He was seeking to protect. They will start with the atmospheric processors and the water reclamation plants, Ilian explained, his voice calm and focused as he directed Kalen's technicians. They'll introduce a microagent that causes minor, irritating symptoms. A cough, a rash, nothing lethal. The point isn't to kill, it's to create panic and mistrust in the system. People will blame your government. Kalen watched him work, a silent observer in the controlled chaos of the command center. He saw the ghost of Unit 734 in the relentless efficiency, the way Elian's eyes scanned multiple data streams at once, the utter lack of wasted motion. But he also saw Elian, the man, in the fierce, protective set of his jaw, in the passion that burned behind his focused gaze. He was not a machine executing a program. He was a man defending his new home. As Elian had predicted, the first alerts came from the lower sector med clinics, a spike in respiratory complaints. Kalen's teams, armed with Elian's intel, were able to isolate the affected systems and begin decontamination almost immediately. But the seed of fear had been planted. Phase 2 will be communications, Elian said, his fingers flying across a console. They'll splice their propaganda into our networks, doctored images, fake broadcasts from you, announcing a quarantine martial law. They'll use my knowledge of your security protocols to make it look authentic. He was a ghost in their machine, hunting the echoes of his former masters. He knew their backdoors, their encryption keys, their psychological triggers. He was undoing their work from the inside out, one line of code at a time. The tension in the command center was thick, but it was a focused tension. Amid the preparations for war, a quiet intimacy grew between the Alpha and the Omega. It was forged in shared cups of coffee during the long night, in the silent understanding that passed between them as they reviewed threat assessments, in the way Kalen would place a hand on Elian's shoulder, a grounding touch that said, "I'm here." One night, hunched over a schematic, exhausted and running on fumes, Elian felt a familiar wave of dizziness. He hadn't had a proper heat since the first one, but his cycle was still unpredictable, his body recalibrating. A faint scent of ozone began to rise from his skin. Before he could panic, Kalen was there. He didn't say a word. He simply steered Elian into a small, private adjoining office and handed him a small, sealed packet. "Scent patches," Kalen said, his voice low. "Lena, my chief medical officer, developed them. They don't suppress. They just mask. For privacy, if you want them." The offer was a universe away from the brutal, invasive injections of the agency. It was a tool for dignity, not control. Elian took them, his fingers brushing Kalen's. "Thank you," he whispered. "We protect our own," Kalen replied, his gaze soft. It was the closest either of them had come to a declaration. The attack came at dawn, not with bombs, but with silence. The city's primary communication grid went down. Moments later, emergency broadcasts began to flicker across secondary screens. A deep-faked video of Kalen, his face grim, announcing that a deadly plague had been unleashed and that Meridian was under indefinite lockdown. Panic was a contagion, and the coalition had just released it into the city's bloodstream. But Elian was ready. "They're using a ghost signal, piggybacking on the emergency frequencies," he snapped, his voice cutting through the rising alarm in the command center. "It's a closed loop. They think we can't get inside, but they taught me how to build the box." He opened a new console, his hands a blur. He was not just a code breaker, he was an architect. He had designed systems like this for the agency. He knew their fatal flaws because he had been taught to build them in. "I need to get a signal out," he said, not looking up. "A message. From the real you." Kalen stood beside him. "Tell me what to do. There's no time to record something. I need a live feed, and I need to route it through their own ghost signal. I can make it look like their broadcast is failing, breaking up, and then replace it." It was risky. It was insane. It would require a level of network infiltration that was theoretically impossible. "Do it," Kalen said, without hesitation. Elian worked, sweat beading on his forehead. He was at war with his own past, battling the phantoms of his own creation. He could feel the coalition's network security, their countermeasures, fighting him back. It was like wrestling with his own mind. Finally, he looked up, his eyes bright with triumph. "I'm in, but the window will be short. 60 seconds, maybe less. They'll shut me down as soon as they realize what's happening." Kalen stepped in front of the camera, his face set. He ignored the teleprompters, the frantic aides trying to hand him scripts. He looked directly into the lens, as if he could see every citizen of Meridian in their homes. "This is Kalen Varys," he began, his voice a calm, steady anchor in the storm. "There is no plague. There is no quarantine. There is only a lie, sent by an enemy who fears you. They fear your freedom. They fear your strength. They believe they can break you with fear. They are wrong." On the screen behind him, Elian watched the coalition's ghost signal fighting back, trying to sever the connection. He held it open through sheer force of will, his knuckles white on the console. "Look around you," Kalen's voice boomed through the city. "Look at your neighbors. Trust in them. Trust in yourselves. We are Meridian. We do not break." The signal cut out, replaced by static. The command center was silent for a beat. Then a cheer erupted. A message appeared on Elian's console. It wasn't from the network. It was from the city. The civilian channels, one by one, began to light up. People were organizing block by block, checking on their neighbors, sharing resources. The coalition had tried to sow panic, and instead, they had cultivated community. Elian slumped back in his chair, a wave of exhaustion washing over him. He had done it. He had turned their greatest weapon, fear, against them. Kalen's hand came to rest on his shoulder. It was strong, warm, and infinitely comforting. "We did it," the Alpha said, his voice low and filled with a quiet pride that was meant for Elian alone. The battle was won. The war was far from over. But in that moment, standing in the heart of the city he had helped save, Elian knew he was finally home. In the aftermath of the failed attack, a new kind of quiet settled over Meridian. It was not the tense silence of waiting for a blow to fall, but the calm, industrious quiet of a city rebuilding, reinforcing its walls not with steel and stone, but with a renewed sense of shared purpose. The coalition's Protocol Zero had backfired spectacularly. Instead of shattering Meridian's morale, it had galvanized it. Kalen Varys was no longer just a leader. He was a symbol of defiance. And Elian, the ghost who had saved them, became a legend in the shadows. His existence was a closely guarded secret, known only to Kalen and a handful of trusted senior staff. To the rest of the city, he was simply Oracle, the mysterious architect of their new, impenetrable network security. He was given a new workspace, a quiet suite of rooms high in the command tower, filled with state-of-the-art technology and a small, adjoining bedroom. It was a gilded cage, but the door was never locked. He was free to walk the halls, to visit the archives, even to venture into the city, though he never did. The habits of a lifetime in the shadows were hard to break. He found a new routine. His days were spent strengthening Meridian's defenses, anticipating the coalition's next move, and deconstructing their propaganda for Kalen's intelligence briefings. His nights were often spent with Kalen. They would eat together in the Alpha's office, poring over star charts or debating political philosophy. Their relationship had settled into a comfortable, undefined space. They were a commander and his most trusted advisor, allies, friends. They were also an Alpha and an Omega, living in close proximity, a fact that hummed beneath the surface of every interaction. Elian was no longer on suppressants. He had allowed his body to find its own rhythm. His heats came and went, manageable now, no longer a source of terror. During those times, Kalen would ensure he was undisturbed, that his meals were brought, that his work was held for him. There was an unspoken, respectful distance. Kalen never pushed, never presumed. He was waiting, giving Elian the one thing he had never had: time. One evening, they were standing on the balcony of Kalen's office, looking out at the city lights. A cool breeze drifted up from the streets below, carrying the scent of night-blooming flowers and wet pavement. "They're promoting you," Elian said, his voice quiet. "The stories they tell in the lower districts. You're not just an alpha leader anymore. You're a myth." Kalen shrugged, his gaze fixed on the horizon. "Myths are useful. They give people hope." "Myths are dangerous," Elian countered softly. "They create expectations that no real person can meet. The agency taught us to create them and how to tear them down. And yet, you helped create this one," Kalen pointed out, a gentle challenge in his tone. "I helped protect my home," Elian corrected. He still had trouble with the word, but it was getting easier. He turned to face Kalen. The Alpha was just a silhouette against the glittering backdrop of the city, but Elian could feel the weight of his presence, the steady calm that had become his anchor. "They will try to kill you," Elian said, the statement flat and clinical. "Not with a system attack, a single operative, someone like me, but better, someone who won't be swayed by a cup of tea." "I know," Kalen said, "and you'll be there to stop them." It wasn't a question. It was a statement of absolute faith. In that moment, something shifted in Elian. The last wall, the final piece of agency conditioning that whispered to him that all attachments were liabilities, crumbled into dust. He had spent his life being a weapon, an object. Kalen had seen a person. He had been given sanctuary, a purpose, a name. But what he truly wanted, he now realized, was something more. He wanted a bond. Not a bond of ownership or submission, as the old world defined it, but a bond of partnership, of equals. "Kalen," he began, his voice barely a whisper. He didn't know what he was going to say. The words didn't exist in his vocabulary. But his body knew. His scent, which had been a calm, quiet frost, suddenly deepened, the sharp, electric note of ozone returning, a sign of arousal, of offering. Kalen turned to him, his grey eyes searching Elian's face in the dim light. He could smell the change in the air, could see the vulnerability and the strength warring in the Omega's expression. He took a slow step closer, closing the small space between them. He did not reach for Elian. He simply held his ground, a mountain of stillness, giving Elian the space to make the final move. He was not an asset, Elian whispered, the words a mantra of defiance against his own past. He was not an experiment. He reached out a trembling hand and laid it on the rough fabric of Kalen's uniform, over his heart. He could feel the steady, powerful beat beneath his palm. "He is not a spy," he finished, his voice breaking with an emotion he could no longer suppress. Kalen covered Elian's hand with his own. His skin was warm, his grip firm and reassuring. "No," Kalen said, his voice thick with an emotion he had held in check for months. "He is Elian." He brought Elian's hand to his lips and pressed a soft kiss to the knuckles. It was a gesture of profound respect, of reverence. Then slowly, deliberately, he leaned in. He did not take Elian's lips in a conquering kiss. He simply rested his forehead against Elian's, their breaths mingling in the cool night air. The scents of cedar and stone, of winter frost and lightning finally intertwined, creating something new. A scent of sanctuary, a scent of hope. The city sprawled below them, a testament to what they had built, what they had protected. The war with the coalition was not over. There would be more battles, more threats, more ghosts from the past. But for the first time in his life, Elian was not afraid. He was not a unit number, a weapon waiting for a command. He was a man, standing beside his alpha, his partner, his home, and together they would face the dawn.